I never thought my own parents would abandon me when I needed them most. But there I was, sitting in St. Mary's Hospital emergency room at 28 years old, clutching x-rays that showed 3 fractured ribs and a dislocated shoulder from my construction accident. My parents, Harold and Margaret, stood awkwardly beside my bed while I explained the mounting medical bills that would soon arrive. When I asked for financial help, my father's response cut deeper than any physical injury. "Cletus, we simply cannot afford to help you with bills right now," he said coldly. "Our budget is stretched thin with retirement planning." My mother nodded in solemn agreement, her arms crossed tightly. They promised prayers and emotional support before walking out, leaving me alone to face thousands of dollars in medical debt that would destroy my already fragile financial foundation. 2 weeks dragged by like months after my discharge from St. Mary's. Every morning brought fresh waves of pain shooting through my damaged ribs whenever I tried to lift anything heavier than a coffee mug. The physical therapy sessions with Dr. Sullivan became my daily reminder of how limited my work capacity had become. I could barely manage 20 hours per week at Patterson's warehouse, where my supervisor, Frank, watched me struggle with basic lifting tasks that used to be second nature. The prescription medications alone were costing me $230 every 2 weeks. My savings account, which had never been impressive, dwindled faster than water through a broken dam. Amanda, my girlfriend of 3 years, grew more distant with each unpaid bill that arrived in our shared mailbox. The stress was eating away at our relationship like acid on metal. That Tuesday afternoon, I swallowed my pride and drove to Danny's apartment complex on Elm Street. My younger brother had always been the golden child, but I figured family was family. Maybe he could lend me enough to cover the worst of the medical expenses until I got back on my feet. Danny answered his door, wearing a nervous expression I had never seen before. His usual confident demeanor seemed shaken, replaced by fidgety hand movements and avoiding eye contact. We sat in his living room, while Jessica, his fiancée, busied herself in the kitchen, clearly trying to stay out of whatever conversation was about to happen. "Danny, I hate asking for this, but could you possibly lend me some money for the medical bills?" I asked directly. "The doctors want me to continue physical therapy, but insurance only covers 60%. My brother shifted uncomfortably on his leather couch, running his hands through his brown hair repeatedly. "Cletus, I wish I could help, but Jessica and I have some major expenses coming up ourselves." "What kind of expenses?" I pressed, noticing Jessica had stopped moving around the kitchen entirely. Danny's face flushed red as he stared at the carpet. "Well, actually, Mom and Dad just helped us with something really significant. They bought us a house." The words hit me like another construction accident. "They bought you what?" "A 4-bedroom house over in Maple Grove," he mumbled. $320,000, paid in full cash from their retirement savings. I sat there speechless while the room seemed to spin around me. Jessica emerged from the kitchen, her face pale, with obvious discomfort at witnessing this revelation. The same parents who claimed they could not afford to help with my medical bills had just spent more than 3 times my annual salary on my brother's housing. "When did this happen?" I managed to ask. Danny's voice became barely audible. Last Thursday. 3 days after my parents had looked me in the eye and claimed their budget was too tight to help with medical expenses. 3 days after they had promised only prayers and emotional support. 3 days after leaving me alone in that hospital bed to figure out how to pay for my own recovery. The collection agency calls had already started. My credit score was probably plummeting while my brother sat in his apartment planning to move into a house that cost more money than I would see in a decade. The betrayal felt worse than the physical pain from my injuries. "I need to see this house," I said, standing up despite the sharp protest from my ribs. Danny reluctantly agreed to show me the property. We drove through Maple Grove's tree-lined streets, past manicured lawns, and luxury vehicles parked in circular driveways. The house sat on a corner lot with professional landscaping and a 3-car garage. It was the kind of home I had dreamed of owning someday after years of hard work and saving. As we walked through the front door, Danny gave me an awkward tour of spacious bedrooms, granite countertops, hardwood floors, and modern appliances. Everything was pristine and expensive. Everything represented the complete opposite of my current situation. Standing on that front porch afterward, watching Danny lock up his new home, I realized my parents had not just lied to me about their finances. They had deliberately chosen to support one son's comfort while abandoning the other son's desperate need. The favoritism that I had sensed throughout childhood was now displayed in $320,000 worth of undeniable evidence. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and mounting anxiety led me to my parents' familiar front door on Birch Avenue. The 2-story colonial house where I had grown up looked exactly the same, with Mom's flower garden and Dad's perfectly maintained lawn. But everything felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of their deception. Harold answered the door with his usual stern expression, wearing his retired factory foreman demeanor like armor. Margaret appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her former nurse's training evident in her controlled professional manner. "We need to talk about Danny's house," I said without preamble. "Come inside, son," Harold replied, though his tone carried no warmth. We settled in the living room, where family photographs lined the mantelpiece. Most of the pictures featured Danny's achievements, graduation ceremonies, sports trophies, academic awards. My trade school certificate and construction job accomplishments were notably absent. "I want to understand how you could afford to buy Danny a $320,000 house but cannot help with my medical bills," I stated directly. Harold's jaw tightened as he leaned back in his recliner. "Cletus Danny has a future ahead of him. He works in marketing, wears a suit. To the office, has prospects for advancement. You chose construction work. Made decisions that led to getting hurt on the job." "Made decisions that led to getting hurt," I repeated, incredulous. "A crane cable snapped and hit scaffolding. That was not a decision I made." Margaret finally spoke up, her voice carrying that passive-aggressive tone I remembered from childhood disputes. "What your father means is that Danny has always been more responsible with his choices. We have been planning this gift for years, saving specifically for his future." "How much have you saved?" I asked. $400,000, she answered proudly, as if announcing a grand achievement. "We wanted to ensure Danny could start his married life properly without the burden of mortgage payments." The number hit me like physical blow. $400,000. They had accumulated enough wealth to buy my brother a house and still have money left over, yet they could not spare even a fraction to help their other son avoid financial ruin from medical bills. "What about when I asked for help with trade school 3 years ago?" I pressed. "You said you could not afford the $8,000 tuition." Harold's face darkened. "That was different. Trade school was your choice, your responsibility. Danny's college education was an investment in his professional future." "So was my trade school education," I argued. "Electricians and skilled tradesmen make good livings. Not the same as a marketing career with benefits and advancement opportunities," Margaret interjected. "Danny has health insurance through his company vacation time retirement planning." I walked over to their desk in the corner, where family financial documents had always been kept in organized folders. Harold started to object, but I was beyond caring about boundaries. The papers I found told a story of systematic favoritism spanning years. Danny's college tuition, $43,000 paid in full by our parents. His car, $28,000 purchased as a graduation gift. His wedding expenses, $15,000 covered completely. Meanwhile, my request for trade school assistance had been denied. My used truck purchase had required a co-signer they refused to provide. My emergency medical expenses 3 years earlier, when I broke my arm, had been my sole responsibility. "You have been supporting Danny's entire lifestyle, while refusing to help me with basic necessities," I said, holding up bank statements and receipts. Danny appreciates our support and makes smart choices, Harold replied defensively. He does not come around only when he needs money. I do not come around only when I need money either, I shot back. I come around because you are supposed to be my parents. Amanda had been waiting in my truck during this confrontation, and I could see her through the window checking her phone with growing impatience. Our relationship was already strained to the breaking point because of financial stress and my inability to provide the stability she deserved. My parents' favoritism was destroying multiple aspects of my life simultaneously. Danny has a future, Margaret repeated as if stating a universal truth. He makes good decisions, follows through on commitments, chooses appropriate partners. The insult to Amanda was clear, though unspoken directly. My girlfriend worked 2 bartending jobs to support herself through nursing school, but my parents had always looked down on her because she did not come from their preferred social circle. I work construction, pay my own bills, and never got arrested or caused you problems growing up, I said. What exactly makes me less deserving of support during a medical emergency? Harold stood up from his recliner, his factory foreman authority evident in his posture. You chose a dangerous job. You chose to rent instead of saving for a house. You chose a girlfriend who bartends instead of finding someone with a stable career. Your choices have consequences, Cletus. And Danny's choices get rewarded with free houses, I replied bitterly. Danny made better choices, Margaret said simply, as if that explained everything. The circular logic was infuriating. Danny deserved support because he had been supported. I deserved abandonment because I had been abandoned. Their favoritism was so entrenched that they could not even recognize it as unfair treatment. I headed toward the door, realizing this conversation would never lead to understanding or change. Harold called after me with one final statement that burned itself into my memory. Cletus, stop being jealous of your brother's success and start being responsible for your own life. Walking away from that house, I felt something shift inside my chest. The pain was not just from my broken ribs anymore. Something deeper had fractured something that might never heal properly. My parents had made their choice, and it was not me. 2 months of struggling to make ends meet finally broke Amanda's patience and our 3-year relationship. She packed her belongings on a rainy Thursday morning while I lay in bed, unable to move without pain shooting through my still healing ribs. I cannot do this anymore, Cletus, she said, folding her clothes into cardboard boxes. I love you, but I cannot watch you destroy yourself, trying to prove something to parents who will never change. The medical bills are almost manageable now, I pleaded. Dr. Sullivan says I can return to full work capacity in another month. It is not about the money, Amanda replied, though we both knew money was certainly part of the problem. It is about watching someone I care about torture himself over family approval that is never coming. You deserve better than begging for scraps from people who have already shown you exactly how little they value you. She was right, but that knowledge did not make her departure any easier to accept. Amanda kissed my forehead goodbye and walked out of our shared apartment, leaving me alone with unpaid bills, prescription bottles, and the crushing weight of complete isolation. The eviction notice arrived 2 weeks later. Despite my best efforts to maintain rent payments while covering medical expenses, I had fallen behind 3 months. The landlord, Mrs. Patterson, was sympathetic but firm. Business was business, and my personal problems were not her responsibility. Frank, my supervisor at the warehouse, offered an unexpected solution during my final day of packing. His son Billy was looking for a roommate to share expenses in a trailer he rented at Sunset Mobile Home Park on the outskirts of town. The rent was only $300 per month, and Billy worked as a mechanic, keeping irregular hours that would provide privacy. It ain't fancy, Frank warned me, but it beats living in your truck, which seems to be your only other option right now. Moving into that single-wide trailer felt like admitting defeat. The park was home to struggling families, elderly people on fixed incomes, and young adults like Billy who were just starting out in life. Most residents worked multiple jobs to afford basic necessities. The American dream felt very far away from Sunset Mobile Home Park. Billy Harrison turned out to be surprisingly good company. At 22, he possessed mechanical skills that exceeded his age and a pragmatic outlook on life that helped me gain perspective on my situation. He worked on cars in the gravel driveway often late into the night and never complained about my loud episodes of pain when my ribs acted up. My dad always said that life kicks you hardest when you are already down. Billy told me one evening as we ate microwave dinners on his secondhand couch. But it also shows you what you are really made of. Rita, our 65-year-old neighbor in the trailer across the gravel road, became an unexpected source of support. Her background as a registered nurse proved invaluable when my prescription medications ran out and I could not afford refills. She taught me exercises to manage pain naturally and provided practical advice about dealing with medical creditors. Honey, I have seen plenty of people get knocked down by circumstances beyond their control, Rita said while applying ice to my shoulder one particularly bad evening. The difference between those who recover and those who stay down is not about money or family support. It is about refusing to quit on yourself. I began working double shifts whenever my body allowed, taking on weekend construction jobs that paid cash under the table. The work was often dangerous and always exhausting, but every dollar earned felt like progress toward independence. My injury limited what I could lift and carry, but I learned to work smarter rather than harder. During those long days of physical labor and longer nights of financial planning, I discovered something unexpected about myself. Without my parents' conditional approval to seek or my relationship with Amanda to maintain, I could focus entirely on building something solid and permanent. The trailer was temporary housing, but my determination was becoming permanent. The most painful discovery came 3 months into my trailer park residence. Pastor Michael from our family church called to schedule a meeting claiming he wanted to help mediate between me and my parents. I agreed to meet him at a local diner, hoping that religious guidance might provide some path toward healing. Pastor Michael arrived with a prepared speech about forgiveness, family loyalty, and Christian duty. But as he talked, it became clear that my parents had been attending church, regularly presenting their version of events to the congregation. "Your parents are deeply hurt by your accusations of favoritism," he explained over coffee and pie. "They feel that you refuse to appreciate the emotional support they offered during your medical crisis." "What about the $320,000 house they bought Danny?" I asked. "That was a separate matter entirely," Pastor Michael replied. "A long-planned gift that had nothing to do with your medical situation. It happened the same week they claimed they could not afford to help me." Cletus, sometimes we must accept that God's plan includes difficult lessons about self-reliance and personal responsibility, the pastor said. Perhaps this trial is meant to teach you independence. I realized that my parents had successfully reframed the narrative within our church community. They were the hurt parents dealing with an ungrateful son who resented his brother's success. I was the jealous sibling who refused their emotional support because it did not come with money attached. Walking back to my truck after that meeting, I felt the last threads of connection to my old life snap completely. The church where I had been confirmed, the community where I had grown up, the family that had raised me, none of it belonged to me anymore. My parents had claimed ownership of the narrative, leaving me to build everything from scratch. That night, lying on a mattress in Billy's trailer, surrounded by the sounds of other struggling families trying to make ends meet, I made a promise to myself. I would build a life so successful and independent that my parents' approval would become irrelevant. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted freedom from their power to hurt me. The medical creditors had agreed to payment plans after I demonstrated steady income and genuine effort to resolve the debts. My credit score was slowly recovering, and my physical therapy was showing real progress. Dr. Sullivan had cleared me for more demanding work activities, opening up possibilities for higher-paying construction jobs. I spent my final minutes of consciousness each night planning my escape from that trailer park. Not an escape from the good people who lived there, but an escape from the circumstances that had brought me there. Every dollar saved, every skill learned, every connection made was building towards something better. My parents had abandoned me when I needed them most, but they had also freed me from the burden of seeking their approval. That freedom, I was beginning to realize, might be worth more than $320,000. 18 months of relentless focus on building skills and saving money transformed my life in ways I never could have anticipated. The construction industry was booming in our area, and experienced electricians were in high demand. I had used my recovery time to study for certification exams, spending every available hour learning advanced electrical systems and building codes. The certification test was intimidating, but my preparation paid off. When the results arrived in the mail, I stared at the passing scores for several minutes before the reality sank in. I was now a licensed electrician qualified for jobs that paid 3 times my warehouse wages. My first major opportunity came through Marcus Webb, a master electrician, who had heard about my work ethic from other contractors. Marcus was expanding his electrical business and needed someone reliable who could handle both residential and commercial projects. He offered me a position that included benefits, overtime opportunities, and potential for advancement. "You have something most young electricians lack," Marcus told me during my interview. "You understand what it means to work for everything you get. That kind of hunger cannot be taught." Working for Marcus introduced me to aspects of the electrical trade I had never imagined. We wired office buildings, shopping centers, and luxury homes that cost more than most people earned in several years. The precision required was demanding, but the satisfaction of completing complex installations perfectly was addictive. After 8 months of proving myself as an employee, I approached Marcus with a proposal. I had saved enough money to purchase my own tools and van, and I wanted to start taking on smaller residential jobs during evenings and weekends. Rather than seeing this as competition, Marcus offered to partner with me, providing guidance and referrals in exchange for a percentage of profits. Whitman Electrical Services became official on a Tuesday morning when I signed paperwork at the county courthouse. Seeing my own name on business registration documents felt surreal after everything I had endured to reach that point. Billy helped me paint the company name on my used van, and Rita made a congratulatory dinner that we ate at her picnic table beside the gravel road. Word-of-mouth referrals began almost immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez, a school principal whose kitchen rewiring job had been my first independent project, recommended my services throughout her neighborhood. Each satisfied customer led to 3 more potential jobs, and within 6 months, I was scheduling work 2 weeks in advance. The breakthrough came when I purchased my first house. Not a luxury property like Danny's gift from our parents, but a solid 3-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood that I could afford without assistance. The mortgage approval process was complicated by my previous financial struggles, but my business income and improved credit score convinced the bank to take a chance on me. Renovating that house became my evening and weekend passion project. I updated the electrical systems myself, installed modern fixtures, refinished hardwood floors, and painted every room. The physical work was therapeutic after months of emotional healing, and each improvement added value to my investment. Sarah Thompson entered my life during this period of growth and renovation. She was a nurse practitioner who had responded to a medical emergency in my neighborhood, and we met when I offered to help carry equipment from her ambulance. Her intelligence and compassion were immediately apparent, but what impressed me most was her genuine interest in my electrical work. "I have always admired people who can build and fix things," Sarah said over coffee during our first official date. "There is something honorable about work that improves people's daily lives." Sarah had built her own successful career through determination and education, earning her advanced practice nursing degree while working full-time at the hospital. She understood the value of independence and self-reliance in ways that Amanda never had. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect rather than neediness or desperation. The contrast between my current life and the trailer park existence from 18 months earlier was dramatic. I owned my home, ran a successful business, and was dating someone who valued my accomplishments. The medical bills that had once seemed impossible to manage were completely paid off, and my credit score had improved enough to qualify for business loans if needed. But the most significant change was internal. I no longer spent emotional energy seeking my parents' approval or nursing resentment about their favoritism toward Danny. Their opinions had become irrelevant to my daily happiness and long-term goals. The independence I had been forced to develop was now a source of strength rather than lonely struggle. My business had grown to the point where I employed 2 apprentice electricians, teaching them the same skills that had transformed my own life. Providing good jobs with fair wages and opportunities for advancement felt like contributing positively to my community in ways that went beyond simple profit. It was during this period of professional and personal success that Danny's late-night phone call shattered my peaceful evening routine. Sarah and I were reviewing plans for a commercial electrical contract when my phone rang at nearly 11 o'clock. "Cletus, I need to talk to you about Mom and Dad." Danny's voice was strained, carrying an urgency that immediately commanded attention. "What about them?" I asked, though I suspected this conversation would not be pleasant. "Their financial situation is much worse than anyone realized," Danny said. "Dad has been gambling, making bad investments. They are facing foreclosure, and they have already borrowed heavily against my house." The irony was perfect and painful. The parents who had abandoned me during my medical crisis were now facing their own financial emergency. The favoritism that had seemed so permanent was about to be tested by desperation and need. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted details. "They might lose everything," Danny replied, "and they want to meet with you." The phone call that changed everything came 6 months later on a crisp October evening. Danny's voice carried desperation that I had never heard before, punctuated by long pauses as he struggled to find appropriate words. "Cletus' mom and dad are in serious financial trouble," he began. "The house is going into foreclosure, and they have borrowed against my house to cover debts." I set down the electrical plans I had been reviewing for a major commercial project and gave Danny my full attention. Sarah looked up from her nursing journals, sensing the importance of this conversation. "What kind of debts?" I asked. "Dad has been gambling at the casino for months, lost most of their retirement savings. He also made some bad investments in a get-rich-quick scheme that turned out to be fraudulent. The whole situation spiraled out of control." The image of my financially responsible father making reckless decisions was difficult to process. Harold had always lectured about careful planning, conservative choices, and long-term thinking. Yet here was evidence that he had destroyed decades of savings through impulse and poor judgment. "How much money are we talking about?" I pressed. "Nearly $400,000 gone completely," Danny replied. "Plus they owe another $60,000 in various loans and credit card debt. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings next month." Danny explained that our parents had been hiding their financial problems for nearly a year, borrowing money from multiple sources to maintain appearances. They had taken out a home equity loan, maxed out credit cards, and even convinced Danny to let them borrow against his house deed as collateral for additional loans. "They told me it was temporary," Danny said defensively. "Just a short-term bridge loan until Dad's investments paid off. I never imagined they were this deep in trouble." Jessica had finally confronted Danny about their own precarious situation. The borrowed money against their house meant that if our parents defaulted on their obligations, Danny and Jessica could lose their home as well. The gifts and support that had seemed so generous were now threatening to destroy multiple family finances. "They want to meet with you," Danny continued, to ask for your help. The request felt surreal. The same parents who had claimed poverty during my medical crisis now needed assistance from the son they had abandoned. The favoritism that had defined our family dynamics was about to be tested by their desperate circumstances. Where do they want to meet? I asked, surprising myself by agreeing to hear their request. Neutral territory, Danny suggested. Maybe that diner on Main Street where we used to go for pancakes after church. The location held childhood memories of better times family breakfasts filled with laughter and plans for the day ahead. Choosing that diner for this conversation felt like deliberate emotional manipulation, but I agreed to meet them there the following Saturday morning. Tom Bradley, the bank loan officer handling our parents' foreclosure case, contacted me directly 3 days before our scheduled meeting. His call was professional, but clearly designed to pressure me into helping resolve the situation. Mr. Whitman, your parents have listed you as a potential family resource for resolving their mortgage default, Tom explained. Given their age and limited income prospects, family assistance appears to be their only viable option for avoiding foreclosure. What exactly are you asking me to do? I replied. A family member with good credit and sufficient income could potentially assume responsibility for their debts or provide enough funds to bring their accounts current. The total amount needed is approximately $93,000. $93,000. The number represented more than my annual business profit, though I had accumulated enough savings and equity to access such funds if necessary. Tom Bradley was essentially asking me to sacrifice years of careful financial planning to rescue parents who had refused to help with my much smaller medical emergency. I will consider the situation, I told Tom, without making any commitments. The diner meeting arrived with unseasonably warm weather that made everyone overdressed and uncomfortable. Harold and Margaret sat across from me in a booth near the window, both looking older and more fragile than I remembered. The confidence and authority they had always projected was replaced by nervous energy and obvious anxiety. Margaret spoke first, her former nursing professionalism evident in her attempt to control the conversation. Cletus, we appreciate you agreeing to meet with us during this difficult time. Danny explained the basic situation, I replied, but I want to hear directly from you about what happened. Harold's explanation was halting and defensive, filled with justifications for decisions that had obviously been reckless. The gambling had started small, just entertainment during retirement. The investment opportunity had seemed legitimate, backed by official-looking documents and enthusiastic recommendations from other participants. Everyone makes financial mistakes, Harold said. We never intended for this situation to affect the family. But it has affected the family, I pointed out. Danny's house is now at risk because you used it as collateral. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. We never thought it would come to this. We always planned to resolve everything before anyone got hurt. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked directly. The request, when finally stated clearly, was shocking in its audacity. They wanted me to provide $93,000 to resolve their immediate debts plus ongoing financial support, while Harold looked for part-time employment. In exchange, they offered to include me in their will alongside Danny, as if inheritance prospects justified immediate sacrifice. You have done well for yourself, Cletus, Margaret said. We always knew you had potential, even when we disagreed about your choices. The revisionist history was infuriating. They had never expressed confidence in my potential during the years when such support would have mattered. Now that they needed something from me, my accomplishments were being reframed as validation of their parenting rather than evidence of my independence. When I asked for help with medical bills, you claimed you could not afford assistance, I said. Yet you had $400,000 saved at that time. That money was designated for Danny's future, Harold replied defensively. And now you want me to provide money for your future. This is different, Margaret insisted. This is a family emergency. My medical bills were also a family emergency, The conversation continued for another hour, but the fundamental dynamic never changed. My parents showed no genuine remorse for their previous treatment of me, no acknowledgement that their favoritism had been unfair or hurtful. Instead, they seemed to view my current success as justification for expecting support, as if my achievements obligated me to solve their problems. Harold and Margaret left the diner after I promised to consider their request seriously. They assumed that family loyalty and their desperate circumstances would eventually overcome my reluctance to help. They had no understanding of how completely their previous abandonment had changed my perspective on family obligations. The drive home gave me time to process everything I had learned. My parents were facing the same financial terror that I had experienced after my construction accident. The difference was that I had faced my crisis alone, while they expected family support to rescue them from consequences of their own choices. Sarah was waiting in my kitchen when I returned, having prepared lunch, while monitoring my emotional state through text messages. Her perspective as someone outside our family dynamics proved valuable in helping me sort through conflicting feelings. "What do you want to do?" she asked simply. "I honestly do not know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to help because they are my parents regardless of how they treated me. But another part feels like helping them now would validate their favoritism and teach them nothing about accountability." "There might be a middle ground," Sarah suggested. "A way to help Danny without enabling your parents' behavior." That conversation planted the seed of an idea that would eventually become my response to the family crisis. But first, I needed to understand exactly how extensive the damage had become, and whether my parents were truly committed to changing their behavior or simply seeking rescue without accountability. The decision I was facing would define family relationships for years to come, and I was determined to make it based on principles rather than emotions. 2 weeks of careful consideration led me to host a family gathering at my renovated home, a decision that would finally force honest conversations about decades of favoritism and its consequences. I invited Danny and Jessica along with several cousins who had grown up witnessing the unequal treatment within our extended family. The house I had purchased and improved entirely through my own efforts provided the perfect setting for these discussions. Every room displayed evidence of my independence electrical work. I had completed myself furniture I had purchased with business profits and improvements that had increased the property value significantly. This was my territory, earned through determination rather than inherited or gifted. Cousin Jennifer arrived early, her perspective as a public school teacher, providing valuable insight into family dynamics. She had always been aware of the different standards applied to Danny and me, but had never felt comfortable addressing the favoritism directly. "I remember your high school graduation party," Jennifer said as we prepared snacks in my updated kitchen. "Your parents spent maybe $200 on a cake and some decorations. Danny's party 3 years later had a catered dinner, professional photographer, and live music. The difference was impossible to ignore." Cousin Robert, who owned a small plumbing business, shared similar observations about how our parents had supported different grandchildren unequally over the years. The pattern extended beyond just Danny and me to include favoritism among cousins, nieces, and nephews based on perceived potential or social status. "Harold always talked about investing in winners," Robert said, "as if family love should be distributed based on earning potential rather than need or simple fairness." Danny and Jessica arrived looking nervous and defensive, clearly uncomfortable with what they expected to be an attack on their privileged position within the family. But I had planned this gathering to educate rather than punish, to create understanding rather than deepen divisions. I want everyone to understand exactly what happened during my medical crisis and how it compares to the support Danny has always received. I began once everyone was seated in my living room. Using documents and receipts I had carefully organized, I presented a detailed account of financial support our parents had provided over the years. Danny's college education, car purchases, wedding expenses, and house down payment totaled more than $500,000. My trade school tuition request had been denied. Emergency medical assistance had been refused. The issue is not about money specifically, I explained. It is about the message that this differential treatment sends about worth potential and family loyalty. Jennifer and Robert asked questions that forced Danny to confront realities he had always avoided acknowledging. Why had his needs always been considered legitimate, while mine were seen as poor planning? Why had his career path been supported, while mine was dismissed as less valuable? I never asked them to treat Cletus differently, Danny said defensively. But you also never questioned why they did, Jessica replied, surprising everyone with her directness. I have watched this family dynamic for years, and it has never been fair. The conversation was interrupted when Harold and Margaret arrived uninvited, having learned about the gathering from Pastor Michael. They entered through my front door without knocking, their entitlement evident in their assumption that family meetings concerned them by default. What exactly is going on here? Harold demanded, his factory foreman authority on full display. We are discussing family financial support patterns and how they have affected everyone involved, I replied calmly. Margaret surveyed my living room, taking in the quality furniture, updated fixtures, and professional decor that reflected my business success. Her expression showed surprise at the evidence of my prosperity, as if she had expected me to still be struggling in poverty. Cletus, we did not come here to be attacked by you and your cousins, Harold said. We came because we heard you were spreading lies about how we raised you. Not lies, Jennifer interjected. Facts with documentation. I handed Harold the financial records showing decades of unequal treatment, watching his face redden as he realized the undeniable evidence of favoritism. The numbers spoke for themselves, quantifying years of differential support in ways that could not be dismissed or explained away. Every family makes different decisions for different children based on their individual circumstances, Margaret said, but her nursing training could not mask the weakness of this argument. What were my individual circumstances that justified less support? I asked. You chose a more dangerous career path, Harold replied automatically. After you refused to support safer educational alternatives, Robert pointed out. Cletus wanted to go to trade school to become an electrician, which is exactly what made him successful eventually. Uncle Pete, Harold's older brother, arrived during this exchange. As a retired military veteran who had built his own successful plumbing business, Pete commanded respect from Harold in ways that younger family members could not achieve. I heard through the family grapevine that you folks are having some financial troubles, Pete said, settling into my recliner with the authority of an elder family member. Harold's defensiveness intensified when confronted by his brother's presence. Pete, this is not really your concern. Family struggling is always my concern, Pete replied firmly, especially when that struggling involves asking for help from family members you previously abandoned during their own struggles. The conversation that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Uncle Pete methodically dismantled every justification Harold and Margaret offered for their favoritism, using military directness to cut through emotional manipulation and revisionist history. You had $400,000 saved when Cletus needed help with medical bills, Pete stated. You chose to keep that money for Danny's house instead of helping your injured son. Now you want that same injured son to rescue you from gambling debts and poor investments. Margaret attempted to cry, but Pete's expression showed no sympathy for tears that seemed calculated rather than genuine. Harold, you raised 2 sons, but you only supported one of them, Pete continued. Now you are facing the consequences of teaching one son that he deserves everything, while teaching the other son that he deserves nothing. The climax of this confrontation came when I finally stated my position clearly and permanently. I will not provide financial assistance to people who have shown no genuine remorse for their treatment of me, I announced. However, I have been secretly paying Danny's mortgage for the past 3 months to prevent him and Jessica from losing their home due to your poor decisions. The revelation shocked everyone in the room, including Danny and Jessica, who had not realized where their recent mortgage payments had actually originated. I helped Danny because he is my brother, and his current problems stem from trusting you with his financial security. I explained, but you will receive nothing from me until you acknowledge your mistakes and demonstrate genuine change in how you treat family members. Harold stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and humiliation. So, this is how you get revenge. By humiliating us in front of the whole family. This is not revenge, I replied calmly. This is accountability. You taught me that actions have consequences. You cannot afford my forgiveness because you have never truly asked for it. Margaret made one final attempt at emotional manipulation. Cletus, we are your parents. Family helps family during difficult times. You are right, I agreed. Family does help family during difficult times. I learned that lesson very clearly when you refused to help during my difficult time. Harold and Margaret left my house that evening without resolution, their expectations of automatic financial rescue destroyed by the reality of changed family dynamics. The son they had abandoned was no longer powerless or desperate. The favoritism they had always taken for granted was no longer sustainable. The other family members stayed for dinner, continuing conversations about fairness, accountability, and healthy family relationships. For the first time in my adult life, I felt supported by people who understood my perspective and validated my experiences. Danny apologized privately for years of accepting unequal treatment without questioning its impact on me. Jessica thanked me for protecting their house while holding our parents accountable for their behavior. Uncle Pete promised to work with Harold on understanding consequences and making genuine amends. But the most important victory was internal. I had confronted my parents' favoritism directly with witnesses and evidence without losing my temper or stooping to their level of manipulation. The independence I had been forced to develop was now strong enough to withstand their emotional pressure and guilt tactics. My parents would have to earn forgiveness rather than demanding it as a birthright. They would have to demonstrate change rather than expecting automatic support based on biological relationships. They would have to accept that their previous choices had consequences that money could not simply resolve. For the first time in my adult life, I held the power in family relationships, and I intended to use that power responsibly. 1 year later, the transformation in family dynamics exceeded anything I had imagined possible when I first confronted my parents' favoritism. The crisis that had seemed purely destructive became the catalyst for authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than desperation or obligation. Harold's journey toward redemption began with his reluctant enrollment in Gamblers Anonymous, a step he initially resisted but eventually embraced when faced with the alternative of complete family estrangement. The program forced him to confront not just his gambling addiction, but the underlying attitudes about control, entitlement, and family responsibility that had created decades of unequal treatment. I always thought providing for family meant making decisions about who deserved what level of support, Harold admitted during a family dinner at my house 6 months after our confrontation. I never understood that fairness matters more than my personal judgments about potential or worthiness. Margaret's transformation was equally significant, though more gradual. Her background as a nurse had taught her about enabling behavior in medical contexts, but she had never applied those principles to her own family relationships. Counseling helped her recognize how her passive support of Harold's favoritism had been equally damaging to family bonds. I told myself that keeping peace was more important than addressing unfairness, Margaret said, but I realize now that avoiding conflict just allowed harmful patterns to continue and deepen. The practical resolution of their financial crisis required Harold to find part-time employment at a hardware store, swallowing his pride about working retail after years of retirement. Margaret returned to nursing part-time at a local clinic, Together, they developed a realistic plan to pay off remaining debts over 5 years while living in a smaller apartment. I did not provide the $93,000 they had originally requested, but I did offer something more valuable, a path toward earning genuine forgiveness through changed behavior and consistent demonstration of equal treatment toward all family members. Danny's growth throughout this period was perhaps the most surprising development. Initially defensive about his privileged position, he gradually came to understand how receiving unequal support had actually undermined his own self-confidence and independence. I always wondered if I really deserved the success I achieved, or if it was just because everything was handed to me, Danny confessed during one of our now regular brother conversations. Working to save our house without parental rescue taught me that I am capable of handling problems independently. Jessica's role in Danny's transformation was crucial. Her outsider perspective on family dynamics and her direct communication style helped Danny recognize patterns he had previously taken for granted. Their marriage strengthened significantly once Danny learned to establish appropriate boundaries with our parents. The broader family relationships also improved dramatically. Uncle Pete became a mentor figure for me, sharing business advice and providing the kind of paternal guidance I had always craved. Cousins Jennifer and Robert developed closer relationships with both Danny and me, creating support networks that were healthier and more balanced than our previous family hierarchy. My business partnership with Marcus evolved into full ownership when he decided to retire early and relocate to Florida. Whitman Electrical Services now employed 12 people across 3 counties, providing good jobs with fair wages and opportunities for advancement. The apprenticeship program I developed gave young people the same kind of skilled trade education I had pursued despite family discouragement. Sarah and I became engaged on the anniversary of my parents' initial request for financial help, a date that now symbolized personal strength rather than family abandonment. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership rather than neediness or desperation. "I admire how you handled that situation with your parents," Sarah said when I proposed. "You stayed true to your principles without becoming bitter or vindictive." That kind of integrity is rare. Our wedding plans reflect the independence and self-reliance that have become central to my identity. We are funding everything ourselves, choosing vendors and venues that align with our values rather than seeking to impress people or meet external expectations. The house I purchased and renovated has increased in value enough to qualify as a significant investment. But more importantly, it represents the security and stability that I always wanted but learned to create for myself rather than expecting from others. Perhaps the most meaningful development was Harold and Margaret's attendance at family gatherings, where they now participate as equals rather than authority figures. They ask about my business complement improvements to my house and show genuine interest in my relationship with Sarah. The approval I once desperately sought is now freely given, though it no longer carries the emotional weight it once held. "We are proud of what you have accomplished," Margaret said recently, "and we are sorry that we did not provide the support you deserved when you needed it most." That apology, offered without conditions or expectations, meant more than any financial assistance could have provided. It represented acknowledgement of past mistakes and commitment to different behavior in future family interactions. The life lesson that emerged from this painful but ultimately transformative experience centers on the difference between conditional and unconditional relationships. True family support should be based on love and fairness, rather than judgments about worthiness or potential. My parents taught me independence through abandonment, but I learned to value that independence as a source of strength rather than a burden of isolation. Self-reliance became a foundation for healthy relationships rather than a barrier to family connection. Forgiveness, I discovered, cannot be demanded or purchased. It must be earned through genuine remorse and consistent behavioral change over time. My parents' financial crisis created an opportunity for them to demonstrate growth and accountability but only after they stopped expecting automatic rescue based on biological relationships. The construction accident that initially seemed like pure misfortune became the catalyst for personal transformation that improved every aspect of my life. Without that crisis, I might never have developed the skills, independence, and self-confidence that now define my identity. Looking back, I realized that my parents' favoritism toward Danny was ultimately harmful to both of us. He learned to expect unearned support, while I learned to create my own opportunities. The crisis forced both of us to develop more authentic relationships with our parents and with each other. Today, Whitman Electrical Services continues to grow, providing employment opportunities and essential services throughout our community. My marriage to Sarah represents partnership between equals who chose each other freely rather than settling for relationships based on neediness or convenience. Family dinners now include everyone participating as adults who contribute to shared experiences rather than seeking or providing unequal support. Harold and Margaret have learned to treat all family members fairly, while Danny and I have developed brotherhood based on mutual respect rather than competition for parental approval. The medical bills that once seemed impossible to manage are now completely resolved. The credit damage that threatened my financial future has been repaired through consistent payments and responsible financial management. The relationship problems that once caused constant stress have been replaced by healthy boundaries and authentic communication. Most importantly, I learned that seeking approval from people who withhold it conditionally is a waste of emotional energy that could be better invested in building genuine relationships with people who appreciate your authentic self. My parents cannot afford my forgiveness, but they have learned to earn it through changed behavior and consistent demonstration of fairness toward all family members. That transformation, more than any financial assistance, represents true family healing and growth. The young electrician I am now training reminds me of myself 5 years ago, hardworking, eager to learn, and determined to build something meaningful through skilled trade work. Teaching him proper techniques and safety procedures feels like contributing to his future success in ways that go beyond simple employment. Remember, I tell him as we work on complex commercial installations, your worth is not determined by other people's opinions or support. It is determined by your character, your efforts, and your commitment to doing excellent work regardless of circumstances. That lesson learned through painful experience with family favoritism and financial crisis has become the foundation for everything I have built since leaving that trailer park. Independence is not isolation. Self-reliance is not selfishness. And sometimes the greatest gift parents can give is the motivation to succeed without their assistance. Have you ever had to rebuild relationships with family members who treated you unfairly? How did you balance forgiveness with accountability when people who hurt you needed your help? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building independent success despite challenging circumstances. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about how family crises can become opportunities for authentic healing and growth. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your worth is not determined by other people's treatment of you, but by your own character and determination to build something meaningful, regardless of the circumstances you face. Sometimes the most difficult family situations become the foundation for the strongest, most authentic relationships you will ever experience.